This is our brand new series, Tracking Transition.
In this series, we wanted to give you the history, we want to give you the personal stories, the anthropology, the science, and the paranormal.
We do know that there were deaths here. It was a difficult and unsafe job.
There are probably like 3 or 4 entities that are really tied to this building, and they make themselves known.
It was like somebody was trying to get my attention.
The cameras that we're about to go set up now, gimbals, lights, extra cameras, internet, everything we need to be able to continue moving. There are 3 big things we needed to focus on psychologically when we were gathering this data. The first one is priming. Whenever you take ghost photos or footage or anything like that, if you are expecting to see something or hoping for it even, you're gonna.
Scientific controls, because the only way we know we get good evidence with science is when we set up controls to take out the variables.
You've got to establish a baseline. And once that baseline's established, you understand the space and what the space should be at.
Yet it's how you get a shadow in a window, and it could be something completely, innocent. It could be the tree off in the distance, but you see a face.
For example, if you get an EMF reading in a room that seems like it's spiking, you don't know if that's a natural phenomenon of the room because of electronics unless you've taken the reading before.
That's when you start to corrupt your own data, right? That's why we wanted multiple people to be searching multiple places to make sure we weren't priming.
Just like any good scientific experiment, you have a control group, which would be the group that's not impacted by whatever you're testing, and then you have a group that is impacted.
The second thing is confirmation bias. It's the thought of you are expecting something that's similar to priming, but you tend to say, nope, that's not it, to anything you don't want it to be, or to anything you don't expect it to be. So even if we start to get good data, if we get like weird noises via audio recordings, so things like that, it's again listening for that. But if no, this is a ghost voice, it's just what it is. It's that automatic locked in blinders kind of aspect.
Then you look for changes, and then once you find those changes, maybe a spike in something, some anomaly you've got to trace down, and then it becomes a situation of trying to determine, is that a natural occurrence? Is it something you can dig into and come up with an explanation?
If you've ever seen a ghost show, they're notorious for saying, oh, there's a cold spot. But unless they went into that room prior to that and took a thermal reading of that room, that cold spot could have been there all along because it's right underneath an air conditioning vent.
Oh, there's some movement, or the curtains are rustling. And, somebody could come in and go, dude, there's a vent. Those curtains are always rustling.
It's the only things you're looking at. It's tunnel vision. The third kind of biggest issue is, if you want to call it the straw man argument, you can. You can also call it a non sequitur if you want, but it's the idea, for me at least, of correlation does not equal causation. Just because this thing happened over here, and we can say that while this happened, we picked up this reading over here, that doesn't mean there's any connection whatsoever. It doesn't. Again, while we try to approach these things scientifically, right, to be able to cut through all of that extra data. But that's one thing we really need to focus on throughout this entire process, is to be able to say, this is what it is, look back at our research and say, here's the timestamp, this is what happened. Is there any possible way to discredit this?
So going around and sort of taking readings of what's happening is important before you go around and take readings expecting something to happen. Also, having people who know about the museum and the history of what happened here and all the objects, whatever's attached to them or the building or incidents, it really helps having that historical context, because you could get a reading on something in a spot where someone can go, oh yeah, something happened here. At the risk of being too ambiguous, it's just good to have these sort of set control things to determine if there's anything that can be ruled out.
To me, I prefer to always to try to, I hate to use the word debunk, but it's the best one. I try to come up with a solution, answer to it, other than paranormal. And then if you've gone through everything you can think of and you can't really account for something, then that at least opens the door to paranormal.
That way, anything that remains beyond the impossible, even if it's improbable, has to be the truth, because we've run all the numbers, right? That's the goal. I was going to say a lot, but let's be real. Almost no paranormal investigation teams or docuseries or anything like that actually has a spiritual consultant that we've been aware of. Sure, they have psychic mediums, right? But that isn't a spiritual consultant. That is not someone who can take the time, cleanse you, check in with you, make sure you are safe before, during, and after. It's essential. So we're going to be cleansing. We're going to be checking in with each other throughout this process. And at the end, we're going to close it. We're going to be respectful. Spiritual ethics are the most important part of all of this.
One of the key things that we want to do with this investigation on a spiritual sense is to ensure that we leave the place just as we got here. So the sense that whatever we do will either better the spirits here and the spiritual presence here, or at least take it back to the status quo. We want to be respectful, not only of the spiritual activity, but especially to the museum. That is very important to us. So anything that we open up tonight from the spiritual standpoint, we're going to be sure to close it back up and make sure that everything is well by the time things come back up tomorrow morning.
So at this point in time, Jay is going through the building, taking electromagnetic frequency readings. He's also taking footage to make sure that there isn't any kind of lights or reflection that show up and make the team think that there is an apparition in the room. In addition, he's taking thermal readings in the room, because one of the things that the team will do is take temperature of variations in a room. So that is what the team is doing right now, going through, taking all those readings so that we actually have control of the museum prior to their experiments.
One of the things that we're going to continue to do with our investigations and our spiritual exploration is to continuously introduce ourselves to the spirits, to give them the respect that they deserve.
What was a unique way to show some of the history of the museum and potentially the paranormal activity here before has become a vital need now as we go into a year that is unprecedented. We invite the spirits, if they are listening here today, if you are here, we ask that you be an activist for us and help this museum continue into the future to tell all the stories of the railroad here in Wilmington. And your presence here is welcome as long as you are kind and interested in us not only educating but entertaining the public about the railroad history. Here we are in 2020.
Diarrhea.
COVID days. Did you just get something crazy on that thing?
Diarrhea.
I think she's talking about diarrhea of the mouth here.
Bouncing off of that, and this is really for anybody out there who could be listening, with these paranormal investigations, that if concrete evidence can be found, so what we would refer to that as would be orbs. Sometimes energy can show up as little balls of light. Sometimes we can hear words come through these readers on our phones. Sometimes we can even see shadow figures and such. That's why it's important for us to have these devices around and constantly kind of holding these boxes up to our faces trying to look at things. In getting more concrete evidence, that will assist in allowing more people to hear about this location, to help to preserve it, as well as help to preserve your stories specifically. So any kind of energy out there that you can put forth, that you can potentially use us for, we would be grateful. It would mean so much to us to continue with this museum.
It sort of relates to experiences on the ghost walk that we do. It seems since the pandemic has started, there's one location in particular, if I may mention the name, the Latimer House, which is also a museum. It's become very active on the outside. Guests are experiencing things on the sidewalk during the tour that I've never known to happen before. And I think because the museum's been shut down, maybe the spirits are having to come out to interact. I know you've been limited here since you've been closed, but in your time here, have you sensed a heightened awareness or more activity going on than, say, normally? And for the spirits, are you guys a little bored that there's nobody around on a daily basis?
I think that may be the case. One thing that I had happen is when we first shut down, we were really shut down for a few weeks. I would come by and check the mail, but really, even sometimes I wouldn't come in. I would just make sure everything was well and good. And then I started making regular pilgrimages in here. But the first day I came in here after about a week of being shut down, I opened the front door and I heard, hello! Like, welcome back. Thank goodness you guys are still around. It was absolutely greeting. You know, I'm a cynic by nature, so I went outside, out front, out back. I opened the doors. I went into the office to check it out and found nothing. And since I have been in this building by myself, which is probably a little freaky anyhow. Being in a museum by yourself is a little scary. I have certainly heard more footsteps, because it's super quiet, so you can hear a lot more. And some of that music that we've all heard working here. And I know the volunteers that come in to keep the model maintained, the model layout maintained, because it needs continual maintenance, regardless of being open. They have had what they call the gremlins. They put a tool down and found it someplace completely different. There have been things, one of the volunteers said to me today, there are things that have been happening recently that there is no explanation for. So perhaps they're a little bit more mischievous, as he said, right now. And that could be. Less kids around to have fun with, so they had to pick on the volunteers.
Anything anybody else wants to touch on?
Hey man, I'm just the comic relief. I'm the clown hired to entertain these people here. So.
Okay.
Got any ghost jokes for us?
No.
Wow.
Well, you're useless.
I've got one. What room can't a ghost go into?
Don't know.
The living room.
Why did the skeleton refuse to go to the party? He had no body to go with.
I'm very open-minded when it comes to my viewpoint of the afterlife.
My background is in hoodoo and conjure. Aside from the actual data gathering, my work is on spirit work. It is actual communication and working with spirits.
I come from a background where I was raised Jewish, and as I became an adult, I am less religiously Jewish and very spiritually Jewish.
I also definitely practice witchcraft. I feel like I have a bit more of an open mind in general about this sort of thing. It doesn't feel like a wild fantasy. It's just, this is reality. We just can't always see it.
I come from a pretty eclectic background. Family members that are everything from, historically, from Mennonite to spiritualist to root workers. I think it brings me an open-mindedness.
I'm based in the Christian faith. I was raised Baptist. For me personally, this works fine accepting paranormal. My belief system is once I die, it's not over. There's something beyond.
At the start of the investigation, we all spread out in teams to gather data.
A pretty good angle. It's got...
Economy.
And then just have this running.
To whoever could be listening, my name is Rebekah.
I'm Kent.
And I don't know if you ever heard what we were talking about in the library, but we're trying to get documentation to show other people because we're trying to work with the people who work here to try and save this place. We're in the middle of an epidemic, of a pandemic. That's why we're wearing masks. And if we get some solid evidence, that will attract a lot of really good attention here. So any possible way that you could manifest yourself, show yourself, or say something, that would mean a great deal to us.
And if I can ask a question, I'm just curious. It's been 5 months or so now since things have been shut down. It's been very quiet, I'm sure you've noticed. Do you like it better like this when there's nobody around? Or do you like it when it's more active and people are coming in and out of the museum and looking at the displays and learning about your history working with the railroad?
Did you hear of the dog boss? We're ghost tour guides, so someone hear of the dog boss?
That's actually the first word I've seen pop up. I don't know what it was, I guess.
One guest who was an elderly man in his, I'd say, 90s. And he had worked for the railroad for a number of years. And as he was taking his family through, he was talking about his railroad experience and railroad stories. We have a cozy chair that some folks wind up sitting in. And he let his family just tour the rest and play with our big layout in the back and just sit down to take a rest. And all of a sudden, he said, he had his eyes closed, and he was sitting there, and he at first thought he was asleep when somebody said, "Hey, bud." And he opened his eyes, and nothing was there, but he heard, "Hey." And he thought, wow, that was a very interesting experience after I had been walking through this whole place talking about my railroad experience. He had also worked in a freight house, which this is what we are in.
Right now. Anything in here? I feel you. Make some sound.
Children often are a bit more sensitive with these things. It's usually the kids that come up to me and say they saw something in the back room that disappeared, or we have a boxcar outside, and I have always gotten terrible feelings in this boxcar. That is the only consistently negative place in the museum, I think. And kids will a lot of times come back in crying because they felt something in there, or there's a bad man in there. We do have mannequins in there. I always make sure to ask if it was the plastic people in there, and they always say no, it was something else. So that's what kind of creeps me out the most, is the boxcar. I don't like going in there after dark. I have the strongest feeling that someone was either killed in there by something falling or murdered in there. I've had several dreams after I first started working here about someone being murdered in the boxcar way back in the day. So I'm wondering if that's what it is. It's not actually an Atlantic coastline boxcar, so it might be harder for us to get the history on it. But it definitely, I don't like it in there. A pretty good angle. It's got basically.
If I need to hold it, I can hold it.
Oh, it's okay. It should be good static like this.
It's recording.
Okay, this is recording too.
Okay, cool. Got that heat thing on there. Do we just jump over this thing?
Careful. Or you can,
I usually like.
I was gonna say, it's easier to go through there. You just have to kind of really. Where the floor is kind of.
Yeah, it is.
Kent and I went back to the very back of the building where the huge model train section is all laid out. And we had been sitting there for a little while, and I had the idea of, it's almost like I had this reason to look at the plane. There's this hanging plane there. And I looked at it for a little while. I didn't have the camera on it because the camera was facing us at the time. And I noticed that it was pointed towards both of us. And then we talked about something else, did other parts of the investigation. And when I looked at it again, it had turned almost a 180. I didn't think too much about it because it's hanging by a single string. But we noticed that it wasn't just turning like this sometimes. Sometimes it would go back. It was never a super quick motion, but what is strange is we were thinking that if it had something to do with maybe the heat hitting the wire or something like that, why would the plane go this way and then sometimes only go back half and then go back a full? It just wasn't quite measuring up. Another one of the hanging pieces in there is a balloon. And I got it on camera just mentioning that I loved it. I thought it was a really cool contraption because it can go up and down. And I noticed in that frame that it was still. It was not turning or anything like that. Well, we go back to it a little bit later, and there's a little bit of a twist to the balloon.
You think there could have been anything like the AC running or a door open?
The AC was not running. We have everything off right now so that we can hear a little bit clearer. We're wondering if it was a rise in temperature, but it looks like the wire from the plane is a different material from what is holding up the balloon. The balloon might be maybe a fishing line. It's actually a wire, it looks like, for the plane. There's another hanging plane in there. It's a smaller one. It's set under the TV. We asked a number of times if it could be moved as well, and it did not move. Strange thing is, personally, when I'm over in that corner, it feels a lot thicker to me. It almost feels like something else could be over there.
A little uncomfortable over here.
So I don't know if that's protecting or not
Right.
protecting, but I don't know if that's part of why. Maybe it was two different spirits in one. Kent actually got, when being over in that corner, he got move on the EVP. Maybe that was it. It didn't feel like bad. It was just kind of like move.
Holly can go back and look through her records. Move, okay? You would like me to move? That was me dropping a flashlight.
That is supposed to be just 100%, just like it is right now.
When we thought that, when the air would be on.
No, it doesn't move.
Okay, because I've got pictures of it.
I've got
in
video.
different directions, and she's got
Oh,
everything.
yeah, no, that's activity because it doesn't.
Yeah, because at one point it looked like it was facing behind Kent, and then like we
The
said,
air is off in here.
yeah.
But our thought was, and we're trying to find. We're trying
Control,
to right.
yes.
Yeah.
Our thought was maybe if the air was on earlier, this is on stream, it could have gotten spun up. The question, if it doesn't move when the air's blowing, it should move when the air's not blowing, unless
Correct.
somehow the temperature.
No, it doesn't move. I've had children report that they heard something in our hallway, which is a place that employees as well hear things. And children's experiences have been music or somebody greeting them. One child said that he heard, "Hey!" like stop. He was probably running. I would not be surprised at all. And it may have been, a person who said that to him, but he was sure that there was no one around him.
Something that I did want to point out is that when we took initial readings of this room, nothing. Nada. Zero on the EMF reader. I started to set up. This is after we had our little chat to say, hey, listen, this is what we're doing for the museum. But if you take a look over here, that's my hand. We're starting to see reading spikes in here. We're starting to see at least a little bit of readings. Now, when we start to shift this and actually start this work to ring the doorbell, as it were, to try and get some more activity, we want to see if this starts to spike.
So we go into the boxcar, the display area where everybody always goes all the time, and we are there for like 10, 15 minutes, and we just get nothing. We got the obelisk on, we got the heat sensor, nothing. Just so we're like, okay, this is a waste of time. So they came out and they said, hey, you want me to open the door? There's a huge section on the other side that's just as big. And as soon as the door opened up, we turned the heat sensor camera around, turned the obelisk on, and it just started bam, bam, bam words. I mean, this creepy, congested area with all this stuff in there. And it's a place where hardly anybody ever goes. So we got all this weird stuff. I mean, we were getting like, adultery and wars and what else did we get? We get it all in a row. It was like determine, trial, interrupt, bad, drag myself, hide. It was just like all this. It was like this story you could have seen in your head, like somebody running and hiding, and we got like choke and mist and all sorts of crazy stuff in there that was just creepy. So that was pretty trippy. We all just kind of started getting like this weird feeling. We're like, okay, this is entirely too many creepy words in a row.
So the boxcar was very interesting. We kind of climbed into the display area that the public sees when they walk in there, thinking that maybe we would find something in there, obviously, because everyone feels a dark energy in there. It said a couple of words, but they seemed a bit meaningless.
At first, I didn't really feel anything. I always feel a little, anxiety when I go in the boxcar, but it just is kind of dark and creepy, so that might be it. But then they had gone into the section where the display is. We have a couple of mannequins and some shipping containers and stuff from the turn of the century in there. And they went in there to photograph. Okay, so Jamie, because you... While they were doing that, I felt someone touch me, which was bizarre. I felt like somebody put their hand, I could feel the weight and the pressure of a hand against the back of my arm. The other thing is I noticed that once they came out of that area, I didn't see a whole lot of thermal change. There was a slight, small thermal change, which wasn't like big enough for like a human being. So I don't know what that would be. But when you look at the footage, maybe you can figure it out. But what I did notice is when they went into we have a second section in the boxcar. That boxcar is huge. So it's divided into two. One is display, the other is storage. So I opened it up, let them into storage, and there was a crazy feeling when we opened the storage door. And that's when the obelisk started going off like crazy.
But then it just started, the obelisk started spitting off words, and then eventually it started telling a story. We kind of asked what happened in there, and it started saying words, strings of words too, like almost forming sentences, saying, I think it was hide, myself, choke. There was some other ones in there. I'll have to go back and look, but it basically was probably alluding to something that had gone on in there. I know it said adultery, some very violent words, definitely uncomfortable in there, much more uncomfortable on that side of the boxcar than the already uncomfortable side that the public sees. I felt incredibly heavy once we opened up the second half. Actually, in the first half, I felt something touch my thigh, and Holly felt something grab her shoulder a little bit. It was subtle, but we both felt it, and it felt heavy when we first opened up the boxcar, but as soon as we opened up the storage side, it was like 1,000,000 pounds on our back. At least for me, it was. And it felt stuffy in there, not just because it is a stuffy area, but the energy around us was very stuffy, kind of constricting.
I was on the other side of the camera filming a talking head on something completely unrelated for Jay, and I started to feel very nauseous, and just my head got very hot.
Just as that was happening, I've been spending about the last 15 minutes going through a book of death notices I just found this evening.
I turn on the obelisk, and I'm still trying to just kind of get my head back on my shoulders. On the obelisk, it's saying a number of different words, but it says killed.
Someone had collected death notices of people who worked in the railroad, and the cards from the funerals, old photos of the freight house, the staff of the freight house, and the staff of the roundhouse, and the office across the way.
I have felt nauseous and lightheaded during or at other places where people have died suddenly or tragically, or let's say their grave area isn't preserved. I have felt that before.
That's what I was doing when people started feeling weird things out here. Don't know if there's a correlation, but it certainly is an interesting coincidence.
I had no idea what Holly was doing at the time, so that's what's weird to me.
After we'd set the control and started to get our data, there was a lot of fun stuff to play with. But the whole point of a control is to see what you can shift. So I decided to spiritually ring the doorbell to see how that affected the data we were already getting. Literally the second we did this, we started to notice things happening more and more and more. Orbs popping up all over the cameras. We started to notice vocal anomalies, audio anomalies. Everything started to shift, so we knew it was working, and hopefully we were affecting that control.
Thanks so much for watching this episode of Tracking Transition, Episode 1.
If you want to hear about Episode 2, stay tuned next week. But if you want to know when we put out any videos, subscribe to the channel and hit that bell. So not only you hear about Tracking Transition, but Rebekah the Ghost Guy. Is it real and how to deal? So we bought a bus. Anything we might do, that's how to follow.
And to keep up with what we're doing, check out our Instagram and other social media pages. Lastly, a huge thank you to our Patreons, especially Nick and Emily. We'll see ya next week.
Stay classy, stay spooky, keep your pants dry, and we'll see you then.